mean, a club of one is what Trump wanted, isolationist, nationalist. So, not the best club of one to be in. Finally, his own chief of staff, Reince Priebus, says he was a star in Hamburg, and no one can take that away from him, which has to be in the running, if not the leading quote from somebody inside the Trump administration. Well, one, because it's complete, I don't even know what that means. He was a star in Hamburg, and no one can take that away from him. It's like Reince seems to think this is kindergarten, and Trump got a star because he was so well behaved. All in all, I thought this was the moment that Trump became president. Nah, this shit hit the fan just like everybody thought it would. Granted, it wasn't quite as bad as it could have been. It was nowhere near as good as it could have been. But he only managed to insult maybe 1, 2, 3 foreign leaders and somehow managed to get himself into a cybersecurity agreement with Russia. So really, this is close to best case scenario for Trump. Moving on to the next topic, I touched on it a little earlier. North Korea did on July 4th launch an intercontinental ballistic missile, calling it a gift package for the United States on our Independence Day. Now, North Korea being able to and having developed this type of weapon seems to suggest that they are now capable of hitting Alaska. To me, and really to anyone with any common sense on either side of the aisle, this has to seem like it's definitively time to change our approach to North Korea. Trying to work with China has not worked. They, for whatever reason, have been deemed incapable of actually levying enough penalties against North Korea to stop them from doing this. Now, I'm not a North Korean expert, but all reports suggest a war to prevent them from striking us first with a nuclear weapon would kill huge amounts of civilians and inevitably end up becoming a nuclear war, the world's first nuclear war, which obviously we should avoid. Now, we responded to this threat and this launch with flyovers Friday and Saturday, B-1 bombers, which are the quintessential bombers in the U.S. arsenal, and fighter jets, which I guess were just there to improve upon the show of force. I like the show of force. I think it's more of a publicity stunt than it is actually doing anything. But I will give the Trump administration credit because something this important isn't going to leak. We aren't going to get information from them until something actually does happen. So there may be things going on behind the scenes, but as of right now, the only thing that has happened is a lot of tough talk and a flyover by some B-1 bombers and American and Japanese fighter jets. Now, I said a little earlier that China has been deemed incapable of actually putting enough pressure on North Korea to stop this kind of action. There's a separate thought that China may have enough leverage over North Korea and its economy because North Korea is so dependent on China. But our relationships with China, I'm sure after this Trump meeting this past week, are not in the best place. Especially with Trump as president, they are not in the best place. Trump flip-flops on China via Twitter. There's no way that's helped anything. And then there's the disputed islands in the South China Sea, which just this past week we flew a freedom of navigation flight, is what we call it, because these islands have been basically built out of the ocean by China, and then they use them as military installations. We do not recognize these islands as a true part of China, and so we fly near them with our fighters. We sail near them with our ships. And this obviously does damage to our relationships with China, further hindering our ability to conduct diplomacy or negotiate with them. Granted, I do see why the United States military is doing these operations, because we have to be able to prove that we can fly, sail, go anywhere we want to, anywhere we are legally able to, and because these islands are not legally recognized as a part of China, then I'm all for doing this. Especially in this situation, I'm willing to accept the repercussions of maybe our relationship with China is a little bit damaged. But Trump's rants on Twitter and the things he said during the campaign, this is why people were so outraged. Well, part of the reason why people were so outraged when he did these things. This stuff comes back to bite you in the butt eventually. Even I, having only paid attention to politics for 4 or 5 years now, even I know that. There has to be somebody in the Trump administration that knows that. So this is why I think, essentially, what I'm getting at here is I don't know what the hell to do in this situation. And this is why I think foreign policy people that make their livings in this type of thing, are the smartest people around. There's so many different angles to consider. Things that aren't even directly related to China or the United States or North Korea are huge factors in this that I can't even begin to fathom. Obviously, I'm a Democrat, so I've listened to Pod Save America, Pod Save the World, all that. Tommy Vitor. Now, he's not going to come with the hot takes like John Lovett, but he breaks foreign policy down, and his guests break foreign policy down in a way that makes it seem so simple, but then something like this pops up, and you're like, oh, God, what the hell are we going to do? So I'm very much looking forward to this week's episode. I think he drops on Tuesday. This is a free promo, by the way. Still don't have any sponsors, but I'm very much looking forward to his episode on Tuesday, seeing how a foreign policy expert and whoever he brings on, what their approach and what their reaction is to this. Now, real quick, I had somehow completely forgotten. I had thrown this into the notes at the last second. I wanted to cover the latest updates on the Senate healthcare bill. Now, the Senate recess is over, meaning that all of our representatives are heading back to Washington this week. Mitch McConnell, one of my favorite senators, and if you're just listening to this now, this is your first episode that is dripping with sarcasm, Mitch McConnell is still attempting to save his healthcare bill, which is still struggling due to its general cruelty and overall shittiness. Because, yeah, well, that's exactly how it is. Big names like John McCain are saying that they think it's dead, which does not bode well for its future. I want to reemphasize again how bad repeal then replace is for everyone in America. Anyone floating this idea is obviously putting politics above the good of the country. Nobody in their right mind would think that repeal then replace would be a good idea. If you cannot pass a bill that repeals and replaces, go back to the drawing board. Do not toy with people's lives like this. Like I said, anybody floating this idea is obviously putting politics above the good of the country and has no business being anybody's representative. All right, this is a little add-in. Originally, I had gone from North Korea to medical marijuana, the medical marijuana issue in Collier County right now. But as I'm looking at this, as I'm recording this, there's a huge story breaking via the New York Times. It's everywhere right now. The New York Times is reporting on the Trump campaign that Trump Jr., Donald J. Trump Jr., actually I don't know if his middle name's J, but that doesn't matter, took a meeting with a Kremlin-linked lawyer who promised damaging information on Hillary Clinton 2 weeks after Trump had clinched the Republican nomination for president. In this report, it goes on to say that Kushner and then campaign manager, current foreign agent Paul Manafort, also attended this meeting, and both of them have only recently disclosed it. First, well, I don't think Manafort ever had to fill out the form, but Kushner originally did not disclose it when he applied for a national security clearance. This lawyer that is cited in this report as having had this meeting, whatever that means, the lawyer has been described as a tool of the Russian government. She produced or was heavily involved in a film clearly and closely adhering to the Russian government's version of events and mysterious death of, I'm going to butcher this name, Sergei Marginsky? I don't know, something like that. Don't know how to say it. Sergei Marginsky, who had uncovered a huge corruption scandal under Putin, obviously, and, Russia doesn't exactly have the best reputation on things like this. Now, Trump Jr. claims that this meeting was about American adoption of Russian babies, which that program was put on hold after Majinsky had been murdered and the United States had levied penalty sanctions against the Russian government. Putin was not happy, so he shut down the Russian to American adoption agencies or adoption programs. So there's that. Obviously, this is going to be a huge story for the next week. I fully expect to have a lot more information to talk about it next week. Decided to put that in right before we got to a local issue, a state issue. It seemed like a better idea. So now I'm going to go back to the original recording where I talk about medical marijuana. All right, so moving on from North Korea into what has become the local part of politically charged. This week, Collier County Commissioners, Collier County is the county that Naples is in, my hometown, are set to decide whether or not medical marijuana dispensaries are banned or allowed to operate within the county. Why is this an issue? Why is this a difficult decision? I do not understand it for the life of me. First of all, it's important to understand that it's all based on population. That the total amount of dispensaries in a given county is determined by the population of that county. We're talking 5 to 8 dispensaries maximum in Collier County. 5 to 8 for the entirety of Collier County. Like I said earlier, I still don't know why this is an issue, particularly the larger debate over medical marijuana or marijuana in general at the federal level. It's not like there's a ton of people just waiting for it to be legalized to try it. If you want it, you can find it easily. It's not that difficult to. Even if you don't smoke, you know somebody who does. You know somebody who could talk to somebody who does. It's not all that difficult of a drug to find, and I think everybody knows that. I really have 3 main problems with marijuana not being legalized yet. 1, it disproportionately hits those of other races besides white. I mean, that's a fact. Go ahead and look at the numbers. 2, first of all, allowing medical marijuana by itself is helping ease people's pain. And if they're being prescribed it by a doctor, I see no reason why that shouldn't be legal or legalized the same way that alcohol is legalized. And finally, regardless of how you restrict it or don't restrict it, I don't think that's the best way to say it, but I'm going to stick with it. It's new revenue for local, state, federal governments. It's revenue to fund these projects that help improve everybody's life who lives in that area. I mean, we've seen it in places that have legalized it. Huge, huge revenues have come into those local, state, and federal governments simply because of the demand for it. Places like Colorado. So that's my 2 cents on that. I hope that these Collier County Commissioners just think common sense, use their common sense, and realize that really this is the best thing. I mean, we're only talking in Collier County on a medical scale. We're not even talking about further legalizing it, just medical scale. Why in the world are we preventing somebody from improving on their condition or easing their pain? Why would we do that? So that pretty much wraps up this episode. As always, make sure to follow me on Twitter at Jack Berlin. Instagram, like I said, we just launched the Instagram account. All you got to do is search Politically Charged. The website, obviously, politicallycharged.us. Go ahead, sign up so you never miss anything, or even a new feature that I think I alluded to in the intro. You can submit a question, and if you submit your question by the time that I'm recording the next episode, I'll answer it on the air. Don't forget to give a 5-star review to this podcast wherever you're hearing it. Only 5-star reviews are accepted. And make sure to subscribe, again, wherever you're hearing this. That helps me a lot. It helps out with, really, it helps out with everything. It's going to help me further expand this podcast. It helps me put more money back into it, advertise, bring people in. It will help me down the road do the things that I want to do with this podcast. I have a lot of cool stuff coming up, planned for this podcast as soon as it starts growing a little bit more. And with that, this episode's over. We out.